Let's move to this one. Keir Starmer's £1.5 million housing project will mostly house migrants. That's according to the Conservative Party. They claim Labour won't be able to keep up with the levels of migrants coming into the UK, even if they hit their target within the next 5 years. It comes as Starmer and Rayner unveil a grand plan to overhaul planning laws aiming to prevent the so-called NIMBYs from blocking development. But who will actually get prioritised on this? Let's speak with Ben Habib, former Deputy Leader of Reform UK, and of course Ben is a commentator on these kind of issues and a friend of the programme as well. Good to see you, Ben. Welcome back to the show. Look, I mean, you almost don't need a PhD or an expert knowledge to work out what is likely to happen with this story.
Well, I mean, the Tories are absolutely right. Of course, it was a problem that they created. And you know, if we have net migration each year, as we did in 2023 of 900,000 people, well, if you put 3 of them each into a house, well, that's 300,000 houses just in 1 year, all given over to migrants. So you don't need a PhD in mathematics to figure this out.
Indeed.
And the country's public services are being strained by unbridled immigration, both legal, mostly legal, and of course, illegal.
Yeah.
And what we've got to do is enforce our borders. And I think one of the other stories that you touched on was the British government appealing to China to rein in the exportation of outboard motors for dinghies. Can you imagine the United Kingdom appealing to a totalitarian, geopolitically aggressive nation like China to help them police our borders?
It's unreal, isn't it?
It's unreal.
I mean,
I digress, but I mean, it's just hugely, it just makes your head explode, doesn't it?
As I always seem to say, if you put this in a Netflix documentary or drama, people would go, well, that's ridiculous. That would never happen, surely. Nobody would ever do that. Of course, I mean, you know, China are exporting stuff. What a surprise that they might be behind, certainly where the infrastructure for these crossings come from. So a big appeal, please stop exporting dinghies.
I know.
Because it's causing us a bit of a headache. I mean, it's just grim all round, and I don't know listen, Ben, I don't know what this country has to do to get a grip on immigration. It seems extraordinary, and as you rightly say, you know, the big number is legal immigration. These are people who've been rubber stamped, whether they're teachers or whoever, whether they're students or whether they are professionals or whoever. But they could, of course, be families of professionals as well. We know there's a big question mark over that. And one of the areas, I think, if you think of social housing, and some of these homes I assume will be social housing, then this is where it gets tricky, isn't it? Because you could have a young couple in the area, in the location. They've been on the list for maybe, they could be on a waiting list for social housing for a decade, waiting for a place because they want to start a family. Along comes a couple from, I don't know, Iran or something. They've got a baby, and by dint of having that baby with them, could put them above the people who've been on the list for 10 years.
Of course, and we mustn't forget that all our institutions, including, no doubt, housing associations, are required to practice diversity, equity and inclusion, which is the progressive discrimination in favour of minorities, whether they be ethnic, religious, sexual minority sort of interest, you know, whatever. They're instructed by the regulatory framework to promote the interests of minorities. So we will undoubtedly see immigrants getting housing ahead of British citizens. Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. And the problem is created by unbridled immigration in the first place. If we cut back immigration dramatically, which we absolutely must do as a country, and we repurposed existing buildings, you know, vacant offices above shops, derelict brownfield sites, of which there are many in London. As you go around London, you will see them all over the place. If we repurpose those, we wouldn't have the housing shortage that we've got. It's that we've turned our back on our borders, and we've got a ridiculously tight regulatory system. One of the things, I read the National Planning Policy Framework that came out yesterday, and one of the things that struck me as I read it was none of the regulations that make development difficult have been removed. So development still has to be sustainable, in other words, comply with all the net zero requirements, which means that it's extremely costly to create it, which means in turn that repurposing brownfields becomes prohibitively difficult. It still has all the regulations on noise, preservation of trees, etc., etc., etc. And it's one thing saying to local authorities, you've got to build 370,000 houses a year in aggregate across the United Kingdom. But if you tie their hands behind their backs at the same time with these onerous regulations, they simply won't be able to do it. Yeah. So we won't even get the housing that Angela Rayner's talking about.
Spot on. Listen, Ben, always common sense. Thank you. Great to have you with us as ever. Ben Habib, have a cracking weekend, Ben, former Deputy Leader of Reform UK.